Hi everyone, welcome to the Community Podcast. Today I'm really happy and really excited to speak with Riel Miller, one of the world's pioneers on futures literacy and a leader in strategic foresight. Last year, almost the same time, I met him in Groningen, Netherlands, and in a way, I started my journey on futures literacy. He has spent a decade at UNESCO developing global capacity for thinking differently about the future. We'll talk today about how we can use our imagination to better understand change and what that means for work, education, and leadership today, because these are the main areas we are focusing more at Bedu community to empower people and SMEs for coping with the changes and challenges by using their imagination towards future and bring that imagination to the present and try to find some outside the box maybe solutions. So I'm so happy and excited to talk to you today, Rio. Definitely you have lots of things to share with us, but in the beginning, maybe you want to introduce yourself in a different way, or say something that I forgot to mention. I didn't even mention Dr. Riel Miller because sometimes when people say Dr. Riel Miller, I can see your reaction in a way. That's why I didn't mention that one, but maybe you want to say something about yourself.
Uh, thank you, Ben, and it's a great privilege and an honor to be invited to talk with you today. I appreciate it, and I appreciate also your engagement with the challenges, intellectual and also, I guess, personal that accompany um, learning, because that's what it's about. Learning is the key, and I guess the point that I would make related to doctor there is that I've always been quite um, concerned for a variety of reasons in not using authority or status um, as the grounds for credibility or privilege. Um, uh, that doesn't mean that I don't recognize the fact that I'm somebody with a PhD from Canada, a northern country, a wealthy country, and that I've worked for organizations that have often been vested with a great deal of authority of different kinds, financial, intellectual. Um, but uh, I think that that's often an inhibition to learning, but also an inhibition to understanding, because uh, learning and understanding require a negotiation of shared meaning. And my meanings can never be reduced or made equal, exactly equal to your meanings and your experiences. And so, insofar as the doctor moniker is in fact a status and um, a signal of some sort of uh, privilege, um, I prefer to not engage in that way.
Real, I wanted to start this episode by asking about the photo you already added on the cover of your LinkedIn. And now I see you added that photo also behind yourself now in this meeting.
Yes.
And I'm really curious to know what is the story of that photo. Maybe it's a good idea to explain what's your, perception towards that and explain it what it is.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, it's called a murmuration, and it's a natural phenomenon that most people have probably seen at one time or another, involving a lot of birds, mostly starlings. Um, and the starlings uh, fly in these patterns that are not repetitive patterns, but are very fluid and open patterns. When you look at this um, quite beautiful, at least aesthetically from my point of view, phenomenon, you see that there's no center or periphery. There's no one group or another. It's continuously fluid and mobile. And that fluidity and that openness, that spontaneity, that improvisation, are very appealing to me. But I also think it's a very good illustration, an illustration from nature that um, such a phenomenon, which looks in some ways quite intimidating. How do they manage to do this? It's an incredible feat to be able to fly in different directions and all, and not collide into each other or whatever. Um, how do they do this? And it offers us an entry point into, I think, a humble perspective because there was no grand starling. There was no chief or leader starling that stood up one day and said, now, I have a vision of the future. We will do murmurations." That's not the way it happened. And I think it's a kind of double message. On the one hand, I'm entranced by its fluidity and its continuous change that it manifests. So, and you can't create a hierarchical order in a murmuration. A murmuration is what I like to think of as an illustration of heterarchy. Heterarchy being the opposite of hierarchy. Heterarchy is something that we actually encounter a great deal, but we're unfamiliar with talking and thinking about it because we're so accustomed to ordering and controlling and commanding and directing on the basis of hierarchy. But heterarchy is quite open. A hierarchy can be, you're at the top, somebody else is at the bottom, somebody's rich, somebody's poor, somebody has a PhD, somebody doesn't, as we were just saying about the doctor moniker. Those hierarchies we understand and we're familiar with, and we organize and live by them all the time. But what about happiness or well-being or meaning? Is my meaning better and more important, or higher or lower than your meaning? No. Is your happiness the happiness of the rich person, the poor person, better or worse or higher or lower than that of another person? It's not. So most of the crucial things about life are actually not hierarchical, and yet our thinking is dominated by hierarchy. So the murmuration is an illustration of what a heterarchy is because it's continuously moving. The relationships and the positioning is fluid, not fixed. So these are some of the reasons why I like to put a murmuration up on my LinkedIn and here behind me as a backdrop.
And the point is, I wanted also to ask about futures literacy and what's it? But I decided not to ask that question because now what I see, you in a way answered in a different way. What futures literacy is? I mean, that was one of the main point. That was one of the main point of view that I learned from you, and based on my engagement in futures literacy and in my journey, exactly, I think this is kind of outcome of how we can understand futures literacy. But maybe now it's time to explain more.
Yeah.
What is futures literacy?
Yes. No. But you make a very good connection here, because the starlings, when they fly in these fluid patterns, and you look at a murmuration, they're doing it in obviously in 3D, just the way fish would do it in water. And so they've got all this space and openness. Um, and I guess one of the challenges for humans is how to create that kind of dimensionality, right? How to create a multidimensional world for us to be in, so that we can have that kind of fluidity. And here's where a competency, a capability becomes crucial. The starlings can do it because they fly, but that means they have wings and eyes and reflexes. The fish have tails and fins, and they're in the water. Um, Humans are in a complex emergent universe, one where difference, change, is the primary characteristic. So that's actually our water. That's our air. That's our sky. And how do we develop the wings and the eyes and the reflexes to be able to be fluid and agile and open, and to embrace the I mean the exuberance, the exhilaration of flying, in this universe. And I think humans can do it by understanding better how our imagination works, because our imagination is what allows us to bring the non-existent future into the present. The future does not exist. You can't go visit it. If you did, it would be in the present. But what we do all the time is imagine the future. If I cross the road, will I get hit by a car? If a baby cries, will it get fed? What are we going to have for dinner this evening? We're using the future all the time. We're imagining the future all the time. And we're paying attention and sensing and making sense of the world on the basis of those imaginary futures. So the crucial point here, and it's not that easy in today's world, is that we don't live in a flat world. We don't live in a determinist world. We live in a three-dimensional world, more dimensions than that, 4 or 5. And how do we become better aware of that? And how do we learn to fly? And I think that here, learning to fly is something you need to learn. And that's what futures literacy really is about. And it's not particularly esoteric or kind of removed from the access of every person. It's completely accessible to every person because every person experiences different kinds of imagining. You imagine probable futures, you imagine desirable futures, you imagine silly futures, you imagine fantasy futures, you imagine futures that are disruptive or discontinuous because the future does not contain the past and it breaks from the past. So this competency, which is futures literacy, is something you can acquire by becoming more aware of what you're already doing. Because everybody is already using many different kinds of futures. There's not just one kind of future. And as you become aware, it's a bit like becoming aware of your wings, or, Ben, I use the 2 legs metaphor, which is that you do use the leg of betting. You do use what's called the wing of betting. You make bets, but you need 2 wings to fly. And the second wing is the wing of emergence, and not knowing. So there's a really very, I think, familiar characteristic to futures literacy, which is that we have all experienced not knowing. It isn't like we haven't, but what do we make? What do we make of that? What do we do with it? Well, very often we're ashamed, or we're frightened, or we're kind of anxious because I don't know. I need to know. If I don't know, I'm in big trouble. And this lack of confidence that not knowing is the way to get your second wing and be able to fly, is one of the things that I think futures literacy really can contribute to.
And this is the main reason I think you believe this competency or this capability is kind of critical for everyone, and everyone should learn about it, not just futurists, right?
Totally. Let me put it this way. children, but children do grow up in protected environments. And they grow up in protected environments where they're testing, they're betting. You bet that if you cross the road, if you bet, if you need to touch the stove, you don't get burned, etc. You need to be able to make bets, and bets are crucial for survival. So anticipation for the future is something that we need to learn about, and we do it, as you know, from being babies, through trial and error. We test, we test, we test, we test, we test, we repeat, we repeat, we repeat, and eventually we encode certain patterns related to anticipation for the future. Now, the difficulty is once you get outside the protected environment where things are kind of kept less open, less ambiguous, less different, more repetitive. Once you get outside that environment, let's say in adolescence, how do you make sense of this different way of relating to what happens? So you go, my goodness, I thought that if I bought these fantastic, sports shoes, sneakers, I would be the most popular one at the party. And I predicted that by buying these shoes, very expensive, but the latest model, I would really be, the one who would stand out, and that's what I wanted. My desirable goal, my probable goal, etc. And I went to the party, and five other people were wearing the same shoes, and we all looked like fools. And so instead of getting the desirable result, I got the exact opposite. Now, what's the lesson that you draw from this? Do you say, I need to be spending a lot of money on polling so that I know exactly what shoes people are going to be wearing to the next party so I won't make the mistake? In other words, do you spend your time improving your risk model, your predictive model, or do you recognize that this is an emergent property of context and that you cannot know in advance? And that not knowing means that you have to turn something that might be a liability into an advantage, but that kind of spontaneity and improvisation, because you cannot know, is fundamental. And by building up confidence and experience with not knowing, we actually enhance the competency that's related to anticipation for emergence. And this, I think, is this example that I mentioned already of walking on two legs or flying with two wings. And it really requires practice. And it's one of the things that, unfortunately, the vast majority of older people who are transmitting knowledge to younger people do the exact opposite. We say the teacher knows the answer. We tell them that if you didn't get it right, you weren't intelligent enough. That if you make the right bet, you will be able to sleep at night because you will have certainty on your side because you're the winning better. Um, and we create this illusion, which is actually very anxiety inducing, that somehow you can control tomorrow and your goal is to control tomorrow. And therefore, not knowing is the enemy. And that sets us up to be in opposition to our universe because our universe is very fundamentally emergent and full of change. So I think that there's an important issue around children, adolescents, and adults that has to do with acquiring the capability and some metacognitive reference points that allow you to understand the different ways you're using the future in different circumstances. And the two go together. Your two legs go together. It's not one or the other, it's both. Your two wings go together, they're necessary. So this is something that is simultaneous. Every instant in the world today is both a bet and an openness. So I think children can be introduced gradually to that, and adolescents even more so. And then adults can begin to actually relate to the uniqueness of wisdom. Wisdom is not something, your wisdom is not my wisdom, and you can't pass it along to me. Our wisdom dies with us. But because our wisdom is the accumulation of our experiences and what we've learned that is particular to our path, our role, our situation in the world that is emergent. And we know full well that we did not know what was going to happen in advance. And we did not plan to be where we are, that it emerged through all sorts of serendipitous and strange and completely unimaginable occurrences, because you can't ask a child to think like an adult. You can only wait for experience to provide you with that awareness.
Real, you usually or maybe all the time stress on imagination and mention that it's really important to, I mean, consider it as kind of muscle and we need to exercise. But for me, I mean, I've been busy a lot with this concept, frankly speaking, personally. And even because of my background, sometimes I have more struggles to imagine and the things like that. But at the same time, for me, it seems you are talking about imagining something which is not possible to imagine because sometimes, when we imagine something, we are approaching them in a way based on our current context, or maybe because we already watched lots of sci-fi movies. I don't know. Maybe my language, my background, my beliefs, value systems, all of these kind of stuff shape the way I imagine those unimaginable stuff. This is one point that I want to ask you how we can practice more to imagine in a different way, even sometimes in a way outside the box. And the second one, the second wing, as you mentioned, it's about emergence. And it seems it's easy to talk about it, but in reality, it's overwhelming because you need a totally different, skill sets and I don't know, the way approaching to the world, the way think about what you experience. For these two sides, I want to learn more now how you can or how you try to help people.
Yeah, yeah. This is important. So Ben, I think it's kind of, you know, this is definitely a sticking point. But bizarrely enough, you cannot use the epistemology, the ways of knowing of anticipation for the future, for anticipation for emergence. And this causes a real problem because we're so accustomed to using the tools. I know how I'm going to be more imaginative. I'm going to read more science fiction and I'm going to add more crazy ideas to my head. And that way I'm going to be more imaginative. No, 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 no. That's not the technique. That's a rational, ideation process. It's bounded by the purpose. The purpose is to come up with a better imagination, better, whatever that means. But generally, better means um, uh, probable or desirable, something that's plausible, something that will sell lots of copies because it reproduces the story of Frankenstein, Terminator or whatever. No, that's important. We need to do that. We need to increase our efforts to and improve our efforts to mm, uh, do combinatorial modeling, extrapolation, disruptive extrapolation, nonlinear extrapolation, etc. But I think that the emergence side actually functions in a different way. It has this paradoxical and probably um, mm, inhibiting characteristic to it, which is it cannot be completely open, meaning it has to have some element because you can't just say open. Open means there's nothing there. There has to be something there. Something has to emerge. So there is a phenomenon that is emergent, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't have a name, that you don't know how to actually touch, look, see, feel, taste, hear. It's there, but it's invisible in a sense, okay? But it's there. Um, and the way that I kind of think about making it easier to shift or to jump from one epistemological framework, one paradigm to another, is first of all to become more aware of our framing. So all imaginary futures are framed. They have to be framed because they don't exist and you have to make assumptions. So there's something called anticipatory assumptions, narrative frames and analytical frames. And within those frames, you invent stories, narratives, scenarios, images of the future. And one of the key aspects of the narrative frame of anticipation for the future is its probabilistic or normative desirable character. In other words, the reason you're imagining uh, is because you want to achieve something probable or something desirable. And therefore, you're going to use methods and techniques that are fundamentally extrapolatory because you otherwise can't talk about desirable or probable. Becoming aware of those frames and becoming aware that part of the narrative frame is probability and desirability gives you the potential then to say, what happens if I let go or change that? So in the emergence for the future side, you still use frames because you still have to invent from something. You have to make assumptions. You can't, you have to assume that humans still exist, that the sun rises, that, the rain falls from the sky, that gravity exists, et cetera, et cetera. You have to make all those assumptions, including for futures and anticipation for emergence. But how to let go of what things are and what things mean. In other words, in the context of a relational understanding of the world around us, that it's the relationships that shape what it is ontologically and what meaning we give to it and how we apprehend, comprehend, sense something. We can begin on the emergent side to really, I think, play with the unnamed, the unseen, uh, and the what's peripheral, what's at the edge. So very often, as you might recall, when we do phase two, which is the reframing phase in the Futures Literacy Lab, and we ask people to build sculptures and to move beyond language into symbolic representation, one of the things that happens is that people realize they don't have words for what they want to describe. I can't really describe it because I don't really know what the right word is. And that's the aha or bingo moment when you've let go of the past, let go of what you know, and when you begin to tease out, to play with something that is not clear and something that's not defined and something that you are going to have to work to define. And furthermore, and this is also crucial, is that anticipation for emergence um, offers us a way to incorporate into our sensing and sense making ephemerality. Again, here's one of the inhibitors. On the anticipation for the future side, we're very preoccupied with continuity, we're very preservation, repetition, because we want, this house to last for 30 years. We want this investment to pay off. We want to make this bet so that we can win the race, etc. So we're very interested in things that repeat and that will be there in the future. Um, Whereas with anticipation for emergence, there's a large part of it that has no repetition, that it's just ephemeral. It's just something you feel and experience at the moment, and it's gone. And you cannot communicate it. It does not go to scale, and it doesn't matter because who cares? The other person's not living your life. You're living your life. And if your life, you feel this at that moment, that's meaning for you at that moment. And it doesn't scale. It doesn't, you're not going to become an influencer because everybody will say, aha, that's just what I was thinking. No. Well, common denominators like that, just what I was thinking, banal, scale kind of economy type stuff, very little actually of the world around us in terms of how we experience it is like that. Most of it is very unique, very ephemeral, doesn't add up, doesn't accumulate, um, is emergent. And then somehow, at some moment, you might say, this feeling that I have about my friend, which is not the feeling I had before, or this feeling that I have about my partner, which I did not have before. Maybe this is the seed of something that allows me to understand that I have a different relationship, that love has many different forms and meanings, and that I don't have to be stuck with Prince Charming, or Knights of the Round Table, kind of mythologies. Um, and this becomes a moment when you realize that emergent phenomena do become more repetitive. Um, and some of those signals are signals of things that will matter later, but that much of it isn't. And so, really, in the context of anticipation for emergence, we're dealing with different phenomena, different epistemologies, and that even changes the idea of being imaginative. Being imaginative in anticipation for the future is not the same as being imaginative in anticipation for emergence.
And the point is, now I remember once in Philip last year, in one of the chit chatting during the lunch or something like that, I asked something to you how we can expand our perspective towards futures literacy. And you mentioned something. Now I can see why you mentioned that. But you mentioned it's really important to go beyond your comfort zone and experience different settings, contexts, people, culture, languages, whatever. And no need to have kind of, I don't know, purpose. I mean, by reason, do something. Just going outside of your comfort zone and expressing something totally different help us to, I mean, maybe practice in terms of that imagination, in terms of that coping with emergence of the things like that. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, but I think yeah, I mean, for me, the way you used the, and what I was referring to, I guess, in terms of comfort was your frame. You frame the world by anticipation for the future, and you say, if I move outside of the assumption that the world works this way, that I can only understand people who speak my language. Um, then you won't get outside that comfort zone. You'll frame things that way. Um, when you move outside, it can be terribly disappointing, and it could reinforce
Exactly.
your fears and your discomfort. And why should we be uncomfortable? So I'm not advocating for discomfort. What I'm actually arguing here is that we need to be better equipped so it isn't uncomfortable. So if I don't know how to behave at table, right? So it's dinner, and I'm in a culture where I don't know, which fork to use or which glass, or how people are going to be served, or when people. These are rituals. These are protocols. I don't know them. And if I want to say, oh, what they're doing is very rude. Well, it's only rude from the point of view of my protocols and my thing. And my ability to see it in different ways, to understand it in different ways, is contingent on being confident that I can be open to negotiating meaning, letting go of meanings that I thought were given, etc. So it's not an exhortation to be in discomfort. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's to say, how can we become more comfortable with difference? Now, clearly, you have to experience it, but presumably, if we practice a little bit and we do, like with children and adolescents, um, gaining comfort with not knowing, then going outside your boundaries is not such an intimidating or discouraging thing to do. And given then that we have no choice, meaning we encounter people and situations that are different, that are not what we're familiar with. And given that the universe is not going to stop confronting us with difference, we either have the choice of saying, I refuse and I want to freeze everything and live inside a castle underground where nothing will disturb me, or I'm going to live out there in the world and I'm going to be obliged to address change. I am not going to do what my father did. I'm not going to live my daily life the way my sister did. I'm not going to meet people who I've only already met before. I'm not going to be able to speak the same language as these people or understand their culture. I'm going to have to learn about it. And if we're confident that we can learn and that we're all in the same boat, then maybe we can do it a little bit better.
It again reminds me something I experienced last year in Flip. Specifically, that Flip, I mean, that teacher's literacy intensive program was about agency. And what I understand in different contexts, the way we understand agency is different. For example, at that time, I mentioned already that I was in a very specific, I mean, period of my life, and I was struggling a lot about how to take agencies and things like that. And that was really helpful. I mean, that experience, opened kind of new doors to think. I prefer to say to imagine in a different way how to navigate and things like that. I think that concept is really important. At least because of that, you decided and you guys decided to, I mean, focus on this concept in the past, I mean, your event program, why it's important and how we can, I mean, understand better in terms of taking agency as well.
I mean, look, agency is tied up with identity. So the point you're making here is about, am I powerful? Am I responsible? Am I irresponsible? Can I be held to blame for not succeeding because I was, not prepared enough, or too stupid, or not intelligent enough, or I didn't use AI, or what? I mean, so there's all these things with agency. Can we save the world from climate change? I want to stop war, so I need to, to act to make it stop. We have all of those pressures, and they're very powerful, and they're very tied up with the curious position of humans, which is that we do have this ability to act, and we do build things, and we impress ourselves. We're very proud. We're very impressed. Wow, look at what you built. Amazing. Pyramids that last for 5,000 years. Incredible. Um, but I think it's deeply misplaced. Um, and even to say it this way is to point to the problem, but it lacks humility. We have to continuously try and reinforce our humility because we're so structurally oriented to being arrogant. Um, the image of power, the power over creation, um, is an exceedingly powerful image, and a very powerful myth. And I think it's a myth which reproduces relationships of power that are highly destructive. And so, there's a very complicated and difficult issue here around agency and how we define ourselves. Um, and I think that it's relatively obvious that we're not capable, um, at the moment, of living, of feeling at home in this universe. We separate ourselves out from it. We put our agency above the universe. We think we can control, direct, and we think we should control and direct the universe because it'll make us safe, because it'll make us strong, because it'll make us superior, because um, it'll make it safe for our children because we're so strong, we're so powerful. Um, but this logic is fundamentally flawed, uh, and it's not like we have not tried before. We have many civilizations that have tried before along these lines, and we pretty much know what happens in these circumstances. They lead to conquest, they lead to colonization, they lead to instrumentalization, extraction, oppression, hierarchical systems like patriarchy, all of which actually diminish the point of departure, which is the capacity to be free. So this incredible thing that humans have with agency about the capacity to be free gets imprisoned by our own arrogance. And these are not easy things to talk about because they're very ingrained. Uh, they've existed for a very, very long time. And people say, well, that's the human nature. That's the only way we can be. Yeah, well, maybe. I don't know. But what's pretty clear is that the species will be, is threatened with extinction by this stupidity, or this immaturity, I should say, really. Um, and this misconception, which is very, by the way, convenient and self-serving for elites of all kinds. Um, these conceptions of power and agency and safety and certainty are very, very useful if you want to reproduce the past. And obviously, if you're the top of the heap, top of the pyramid, you want to reproduce the past. So, it works very well. It's not because it doesn't work that it's not, it does, but it runs into an obstacle, which is it doesn't correspond to the universe. And that obstacle, for instance, with climate change, where it's not other humans saying you're bad or you're doing the wrong thing. It's just the planet saying, look, your way of relating to the world around you is so destructive, so extractive, so lacking in respect, and so kind of bereft of your inclusion. I mean, it's a weird thing. It's even hard to talk about. We are part of this universe. We're not separate. We're not running by our own rules. Um, and so there's this question then of how to really alter who we think we are, which is tightly connected to agency and connected to fears and hopes and existing systems, etc. But you're right that it's a it's a question that when you get into the issue of agency, it really becomes um, mind bending because of where we're coming from.
I already asked some main questions I was thinking about. I just want to ask you at the end if I missed something, or maybe you want to stress on something that I forgot to ask. Just mention it, and then wrap up the discussion and finish
Yeah.
this.
I mean, in this conversation, we haven't gone into much of the practical side of how to become more futures literate, et cetera. And as you know, I believe that action research, action learning, action learning by doing are very natural ways for us to become more aware of the diversity of our anticipatory systems. In other words, the diversity of different kinds of futures, and that there are different methods, different epistemologies that are related to these different kinds of futures, different ontologies of the future, and that this can be learned in many different ways, and it can also, I think, uh, have as a point of origin specific cultural and historical and geographic characteristics, because everywhere and all the time, our relationships to anticipation, to imagining the non-existent future, um, they're changing. And we have multiple temporalities and we have multiple myths and we have different ways of relating to these. And if we can design learning processes where people acquire the kind of muscle exercise of understanding that there's a difference between anticipation for the future and anticipation for emergence, that probable is not the same as desirable. The novelty requires letting go of the past. Um, these are capabilities that I think can enhance our capacity to be free, and by enhancing our capacity to be free, they change the conditions of change uh, uh, related to agency, related to our relationships to each other and to the world. And that's really something that is not esoteric or academic or inaccessible. It's really something that everybody can do because everybody is actually experiencing it. And it's just a question here of refining, drawing attention, looking at the lessons of daily life in a somewhat different way. So instead of the lessons of daily life being how can I win the race only, it becomes how can I win the races that I care about, but how can I also embrace, detect, invent not knowing, and look for the joy and the implications of not knowing. And that balance, I think, opens up an opportunity for humans to be much less defensive and aggressive with respect to security, safety, um, and difference, and not feeling as threatened by the other and not being threatened by change, but rather being energized, being, you know, inspired by change.
Thank you so much, Riel, for sharing your insight today and for joining me all the time. I've been learning a lot from you, at least during past year. Also, for those listening, you can explore more of Riel's work on his website, which is www.rielmiller.com. And of course, you are sharing your LinkedIn profile on the description of this episode. If anyone wants to follow you, it's simple and easy. And also, we are publishing these episodes, same as the previous ones, on different platforms such as Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Thank you again. And I just want to wrap up. Until next time, stay curious and keep imagining better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Bye bye.
Bye.